Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Kangas, and I work with the Florida Public Archaeology Network in our Southwest region. And today we have an awesome guest. Dr. Justin Dunavant is here to introduce a new segment for Hulu's show called Your Attention Please. So I'm very excited. We've only had a few guests on, so I'm really excited to have him joining us today. So I'm going to read Dr. Dunavant's biography, and he is going to come on and introduce, say anything else he's interested in about his work and what he's doing right now. And then he's going to introduce the segment, and we're going to screen the segment. It's about 7 minutes long. And then Dr. Dunavant is going to answer any questions that come up during it. So while you're watching the video, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to ask him live. If you're watching this in the future or on Instagram and you have any questions, please feel free to put them in there, and I will send them to him and get you some answers for those questions. So Dr. Justin Dunavant is an Academic Pathways postdoctoral fellow at Vanderbilt University's Spatial Analysis Research Laboratory. In fall 2021, he will join the faculty of UCLA's Anthropology Department as assistant professor. Congratulations. Dunavant holds a BA in History and Anthropology from Howard University and an MA and PhD from University of Florida. While his former research interrogated the history and representation of minority groups in southern Ethiopia, his current work in the US Virgin Islands investigates the relationship between ecology and enslavement in the former Danish West Indies. Justin has conducted archaeological research in the US Virgin Islands, Belize, Jamaica, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Mozambique, and the Gambia. As a regular participant in Diving with a Purpose's maritime archaeology training program, Justin is developing his skills in maritime archaeology. Working with DWP, he has assisted in the documentation of the Slobodna and Acorn wrecks, as well as the search for the slave ship Guerrero. In addition to his archaeological research, Justin is co-founder and president of the Society of Black Archaeologists, an AAUS scientific scuba diver, and consults for the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture Slave Wrecks Project. So with that, I will bring on Dr. Dunavant and let him, so if you can just tell us anything else about your work and introduce the segment, and I'll turn off my video and my audio.
Yeah, definitely. No, thank you for that introduction. I mean, I think there's a lot of different things that of course could get covered, and I'm trying to expansively work in many different areas and open up pathways so that we can begin to see ourselves working across many fields and disciplines and subdisciplines. And so, the maritime archaeology is a fairly newer endeavor, but we're hoping that we can use it as an opportunity to train others and to get others involved in maritime work. And exploring this idea that, African American history and heritage really exists on land and underwater. And, I'm thankful to the producers at Hulu, as well as colleagues at Alias Films and others who were involved in making this project happen that we'll see. Because I conveyed that to them, that I wanted to show the full breadth of the various projects that not only I'm engaged in, but the ways in which African-American archaeology is moving. And I think they were really receptive to that, and I think did a good job in expanding that and showing the different ways in which we're moving. So it was excited working on this project. I hope that it inspires some people, specifically younger people, to get involved and to see how they can see themselves in archaeology. And the reception has been great. So I'm looking forward to having the viewers watch the segment live and then maybe answering some questions afterwards. So without further ado, I guess we can jump right into it and take a look at the video.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and we will watch the video. Again, it takes about it's a 7-minute clip. And this is on Hulu's Your Attention Please. So watch the whole episode, and this is a really fantastic clip. And like I said, if anybody has questions or comments, put them in the chat and I will ask them to Dr. Dunavant after this segment airs. And if you're watching in the future, I'll make sure he gets those questions. So let's go ahead and get this shared, and we'll turn off our videos and audio so you can watch.
Your attention, please.
Are you a time traveler?
I do travel through time. That's one of the superpowers that we as archaeologists possess. My name is Justin Dunavant. I'm an archaeologist, and I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee at Vanderbilt University. Traditionally, I would be in St. Croix right now. I would be excavating, we'd have a number of students. Once we uncover what it is that has been damaged, distorted, or lost, we can begin to think about restoring some of those things. And for me, that's the exciting part. I think as researchers and academics, we often get caught up in identifying problems, but are rarely in a position to offer solutions to the problem. And I think that's the most exciting part. I had two older brothers, and so I was hanging out with them and their friends most of the time. So, by the time I hit middle school, they were in high school. I started college when I was 16 years old. So it was me and another friend of mine that were the two youngest kids at Howard University then. I wanted to travel, I wanted to see the world. Archaeology is really something that stuck out to me and spoke to me when I got to college. I wanted to study abroad my first year, and the only trip that didn't have a prerequisite was to go on an archaeology dig in the rainforest in Belize. And so I had never been camping before, but I said, sign me up. I lived in the rainforest for 6 weeks. We were excavating a Mayan plaza. I just thought, this is amazing. I was traveling 3 times a month, so at least within 10 days, I was on a plane going somewhere. I was rarely home, and actually I explained to people when I wrote my dissertation, I was doing fieldwork in Ethiopia, and I think I was home for maybe 3 months out of the whole year. That's a life that we live as archaeologists out of necessity. So you really start to value what it is that you actually need, and you learn how to make home wherever you end up. The focus and theme of what I do is really centered around Africa and the African diaspora over the last 500 years. Doing this work has really opened my eyes to the idea that there's a whole other aspect of history. Oftentimes we think of pirates, we look at Captain Morgan and all these other pirates and Blackbeard, but we rarely understand or interrogate the fact that a lot of them were involved in the slave trade. Blackbeard the pirate, his ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a slave ship that he captured with over 200 Africans on board, and he sold those Africans. It's part of a much larger goal focusing on the slave trade. It's twofold. One of it is actually understanding what happened during the slave trade. We're talking about a large forced migration of people from Africa to the Americas. And then you have to deal with the ramifications on the US side. Indigenous populations that have been displaced and actively erased from many landscapes. People having to make new life in this place that wasn't traditionally theirs. I draw strength mainly from ancestors. I know that I'm not doing this work alone. These are the cabins where the enslaved people would have lived. Over time, they were rebuilt and repurposed. These were actually lived in up until the 1960s. One of the most interesting finds that we found and that you can actually see in this imagery is if you zoom in, we actually dug down to bedrock, which is the foundation of the island, and you can see what we call post holes in the bedrock. So these were actual holes that would have been dug into the bedrock to affix some sort of post. So that leads us to assume that perhaps enslaved Africans were repurposing these post holes that were created by indigenous people. From that point, we have to completely reconfigure and rethink how it is that we understand Black history in America. Understanding what they were up against, what they've been through, what decisions they had to make, allows us to add a more humanized component to their life and their story. Diving with a Purpose is a nonprofit organization founded around 15 years ago. A group of Black scuba divers. They got into these conversations with National Park Service and realized National Park Service has underwater parks just like they have land parks. The problem is they're vastly understaffed and underutilized. These recreational divers said, well, we love scuba diving, we'd love to help and assist. More importantly, one of the national parks was actually looking for a slave shipwreck. And at that point, National Association of Black Scuba Divers said, well, we'll offer our talents to help you search for these slave shipwrecks. Part of my work now is also trying to not just understand the events as they occurred, but the mentalities that allowed them to occur so that we can begin to change some of those. Afrofuturism allows us to think through and explore what could have been if the past had been different. Afrofuturism allows us to dream, to imagine, to think about what can be. I've got a few things in the works right now. The main project is in Africatown, Alabama. The last slave ship to enter the United States, the Clotilda, was located recently. And that created a whole new resurgence of memory, of history, of excitement and exploration, and then also an intensive sort of revisiting of the history of the town of Africatown. The town was founded by the people who came on that ship. A few years after the ship arrived, slavery was abolished. And so those people who were brought on that ship found themselves now, quote unquote, free in the United States. And they came back to the area where the ship dropped them off at and established a community in Africatown. I honestly think archaeology in Africatown will be one of the most significant archaeology sites in the 21st century if we do it right. I think Indiana Jones raised awareness about archaeology, but didn't attract enough people to it. When I talk to younger people today that actually get into archaeology, a lot of them really get into it for similar reasons that I did. This idea that I'm constantly working on a new project and exploring new ideas that people either haven't thought about or that people are now thinking about in a new way. Archaeology provides us with another archive that we can use to explore Black history. I would just tell the future generation, remember, remind, and restore. You have a responsibility to your community. You have a responsibility to the world. There's really nothing that's outside of your capabilities as a human being. Anything and everything is possible. And I just ask you to tap into that and live your life to the fullest.
All right. That was excellent. I have watched that video probably 15 times now, and every time it is inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we've got a couple of questions in the comment section. So anyone else who's watching, if you have any questions for Dr. Dunavant, please put those in and I'll ask him. So we got one question from Sarah. Dr. Dunavant, what were some of the unexpected challenges of creating this show?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So I had never, I'm not gonna say never. Okay. I hadn't been involved in a production, I guess, centered on my work before. And so seeing kind of what that process entailed was very interesting. I think the biggest challenges, of course, were, this is in the middle of COVID and travel isn't possible. So it was very interesting to see how they navigate that. And I think that the animation was a big part of the way we were able to sort of navigate that. Traditionally, they would have been on site filming. And so I think that's part of the reason why you hear me talk about traditionally I would be in St. Croix. So that would have been good if we could have actually gone to St. Croix to film this project. But the fact
so
that
was that part of the plan when you were planning the film, was to be in St. Croix and you had to like change it all, or did all of this happen like during COVID?
It all happened during COVID, but there were questions if there was some way to navigate actually getting out to the field, which I had to say, unfortunately, no. Yeah.
Probably a good choice.
Yeah.
And we actually had a comment. Dave said, I didn't expect the animation when I tuned in, and I love it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we have a question from Mike. Mike says, amazing video. Thanks for sharing it. In the opening scene, the producer asks you if you were a time traveler. I love that analogy. If you could travel through time, who is one historic person you'd want to meet and why?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I guess I should have that like pre-written in my head just in case I ever get asked that again. One person that I could visit in time. Yeah, that's a good question. It might be somebody like my answer is usually like somebody like Bruce Lee or something like that, but those aren't really like historic figures. Those are just people I'm really interested in.
You can just visit whoever you want. All right.
Okay.
So Bruce Lee.
Not the best for archaeologists, but that's my own personal.
So Linda asked about the Clotilda. She said, was it wrecked on purpose? So can you give us a little background on the Clotilda wreck?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the Clotilda wreck, initially there was a journalist that thought they found the Clotilda. There was a team that came out, involved National Park Service, National Geographic and others, and determined that specific wreck wasn't. But it enacted this larger search to actually locate it. And so a number of entities came together, and I don't fully know everybody. I know Park Service was involved. I believe Search was involved out there in Florida, and some other individuals. And they located the wreck. And the story behind it is that the ship came in. Of course, this was after slavery ended, so it was an illegal voyage. And to cover the evidence of it, they actually burned the wreck after they took everybody off the ship and sunk it, scuttled it intentionally. And then after that, I think a series of times after, it was actually dynamited intentionally to try to further conceal it. So it's yeah, it was a little difficult to locate, and of course intentionally wrecked. So yeah.
So if we have any students who are interested in underwater archaeology and like getting involved with some of like the Slave Wrecks project or any of these types of projects, and maybe specifically diving with a purpose, how can people get involved with those?
Yeah, one of the things I want to do is try to find ways that we can get, young people at any level more engaged in archaeology generally, and I think particularly maritime archaeology there's some unique ways to get into it. So, one thing I always recommend is work on your swimming and get your scuba certification if you can. Those are good ways to get involved. You don't necessarily have to be a diver to do maritime archaeology work. There's a lot of GIS processing and spatial analysis that happens, a lot of archival work that happens as well. And there's a lot of maritime sites that aren't necessarily underwater, which is also interesting to explore. But if you're interested in learning more, I always say reach out to a maritime archaeologist. There are organizations and entities that are doing this work. And if you do have the scuba experience and interested, I always recommend going to Diving with a Purpose's website. They do an annual Diving with a Purpose trip, of which I'm one of the instructors. And we take people out to Key Largo, Florida. We work with NOAA and we map a wreck once a year with recreational scuba divers who are, of course, professionally trained. So you can get involved that way.
That's awesome. And I'll put the link to Diving with a Purpose in the comments as well. So anyone who's interested can check that out. Let's see. Dr. Donovan, so this is from Heather. Dr. Donovan, do you have any opportunities to work with or mentor youth who are interested in the field of archaeology?
Oh, wow. I do it all the time, and I'm trying to, sort of allocate people to where their interests are, just so I'm not flooded with too many requests and calls. But thankfully, there's a lot of colleagues out there that are doing this work. I do recommend for young people to reach out to Archaeology in the Community. I believe Dr. Alex Jones has been on this FPAN before. If not, I know
she hasn't been on the live, but we've worked with her quite a few times. She's fantastic.
Perfect. Yeah. So her organization, Archaeology in the Community, has done a lot of good work around getting young people into archaeology. So I recommend starting there first. And then, if college and graduate school are interests of yours, definitely feel free to reach out, and we'll see if we can direct you in the right way to have your dreams come to reality.
Awesome. And I'll put the Archaeology in the Community link as well in the comments. So this is a question from me. What is one topic or subject that you would like to see archaeology as a discipline kind of come study more, focus on more, kind of take a turn into?
Yeah. I would like to see there's so many interesting sites that are out there. I would like to see archaeology as a discipline get more intentional in training as well as doing research. And I would like to see, more sites of the African diaspora explored. We tend to work in the US, we've done some work in the Caribbean, but we haven't done the best job in terms of actually training people from these areas to be able to go out and explore their own sites. And funding becomes a very difficult issue as well. So I think in archaeology, if we could begin to think more robustly about that, that would be great. And then, of course, public outreach. I think, this entity and, other activities like this are great, but a lot of times you don't get recognition for the work that you do, and you have to kind of do it as a side project. So I think if we intentionally try to do more outreach, I think we could go a long way with it.
Excellent. And I guess kind of related to that. So in the video, you talk about how you got into your first field school because it was the one that had no prerequisites, right? So like it was accessible for what you had. How do you see, or what opportunities do you see to make archaeology more accessible to more people? So you mentioned funding, and I feel like that's probably a really big one.
Yeah, funding's a big one. I mean, just spreading the word is big as well. I didn't really know what archaeology was until I got to college, and it was really falling into that exposed me to what it was and what it was capable of. So I think that's big. And then I have friends that have kids that are interested in archaeology from very young ages, at like 4, 5, 6 years old. And we lose them because there aren't activities or resources or ways for them to stay engaged at a young age. And I think if we can, really begin to target that and think about ways to keep young kids involved, we can really push it to another level.
Excellent. All right. This is good. This is going right in here. As FPAN, this is like our job. So that's great.
Okay, perfect.
So you talk in the video a little bit about Afrofuturism, and I am curious, how does the study of Afrofuturism and kind of this like different present, different future, how does that influence the way that you study the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have to give a shout out to the director Vlad for throwing that question in there during the recording. But yeah, Afrofuturism is, it's one of those things where, I often tell people we're often as archaeologists working with an incomplete archive. So we have artifacts, we don't necessarily have full context. We definitely don't have a full written story. So a lot of the work we do becomes speculative. But that speculative work is based off of, in many cases, scientific data. And for us, then, Afrofuturism is a way that we can see other people taking, specific events or scientific data and beginning to speculate in another way. And so for me, it's kind of like an exercise. It's a training ground if you think about Afrofuturism. And they think forward into the future, what will happen. We often think backwards into the past about what did happen. And I think the two of them together really offer this sort of unique way to explore, Black history and world history.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I try to talk about when a lot of times these videos are about like the history of Southwest Florida and the archaeology in the area. So one of the things I try to make sure people understand is the understanding that we have of our past is based on the interpretations of the archaeologists who dug up the actual stuff. So it's always, I think, really important to recognize that if it's like a lot of, if it's the same type of people asking the questions all the time, you're going to get the same types of questions. So having more knowledge, more, a larger breadth of people involved in asking those questions, we're going to get much different interpretations. So that's really, really cool. We have another question from Linda about the Clotilda. She asked what kinds of artifacts were found on that wreck, if any.
Yeah, so they're actually going to be doing more extensive archaeological work over the next few years that'll reveal some of those artifacts. To date, it's been documented and mapped, but actual excavations haven't fully occurred yet. So we're looking forward to see actually what comes up from it and what information we can glean. Yeah.
So stay tuned, Linda, and I'll post articles that I see about that on our Facebook and Instagram pages.
Yeah.
So, okay, last question, unless we get more in the Facebook comments. So how do you go about connecting material culture to mentality? So you talked a lot about interpreting not just the events that happened, but the mentality that allowed them to happen. So how do you go from the material culture into actually figuring out what that mentality was and interpreting that?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. And again, this is where the speculation comes in. So, for me, a lot of it is looking at what is the material evidence telling us about the way people lived, and then beginning to think through, what were the sort of mental processes that either forced them to live that way or encouraged them to live in a certain way. And for me, I think that's the most important, because that's how we begin to see how the past impacts the present and can potentially impact the future. So for example, in my research looking at environmental degradation and slavery, we're finding evidence of burnt sugarcane, or called bagasse. And we're thinking to ourselves, okay, if we find evidence of this, sugarcane, the process of cultivation of sugar, of rum production, it has a physical material record that it leaves behind. What is it that would have caused people to then decide to essentially slash and burn most of these Caribbean contexts to create plantation agriculture and not consider, the sustainability of it or the longevity of it as something that needed to be addressed? And that's when we begin to start to get into these deeper questions then about the work that we're doing and how impactful it can be in the future. And, I think people often don't look back further enough when they think about how to move forward. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we have this material record of, hundreds of years old, we can say, well, the processes that you aren't even thinking about have been occurring over the last 300 years, 400 years, and they will continue to occur at much, extensive more rates if we don't do anything about it. And I think that's when we can begin to offer contributions as archaeologists to these wider discussions.
Excellent. Yeah. And yeah, I've really liked, following your work and especially like work that I've seen come up on the Society of Black Archaeologists that they post about and host and things like that. The intersection of archaeology and actually, instead of just talking about archaeology as something that's only in the past, really looking at how it can affect, mentality today, and how understanding that mentality in the past can help to change and inform the mentalities that we have today. So as a public archaeologist, I really appreciate you talking about that and, expanding on that, because I think that's a really important role that we can play as public archaeologists, is helping the public understand, these hundreds of years of like the system that's, the things that we're dealing with aren't necessarily new. They've been in the process for a long time. So, so having a better understanding of how that started and how that's been going in order to change it in the future.
Yeah, and we're people too, so we can get involved in coral reef restoration and environmental conservation and all these other areas that don't necessarily touch on archaeology, but that we have a hand in exploring further.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. So we can go ahead and wrap it up. Again, if anyone has questions, we're going to leave this video up. So if you have any questions in the future, I will get the notification and I'll let Dr. Dunavant know, and I can get you an answer to your question. I'll put lots of links to the things that we've talked about today in the comments so that you can do more research, get involved. Dr. Dunavant, is there anything that you would like to say in summary or to wrap up?
Yeah, no, I mean, just thank you all for tuning in and watching and sharing it around. The reception for the video has been amazing, and we're looking forward to working with colleagues to see if we can get more archaeologists this sort of media exposure and begin to expose more people around the world to the beauty and benefits of archaeology. So looking forward to what the future holds. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for taking the time. I know you are very, very busy, so thank you for taking the time to come on the Facebook Live this week. So for everyone watching, I'll be back next week with another Facebook Live. And thank you again, Dr. Dunavant. And I will see all of you next week. So with that, I'll go ahead and end the meeting. So Dr. Dunavant, thank you again for everything. And hopefully I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you.
All right, bye.